I'm Matt.
Hey, I'm Steve.
Hey, I'm John.
This is the Sober Friends Podcast. We're here for the sober curious, the new guy, and the old timer. We're here to talk about the stuff anyone looking to live alcohol-free has to face day to day, and how we overcame those struggles. We speak for no 12-step group, but we do try to remain anonymous. You're not alone. This is the Sober Friends Podcast.
All right, Steve, I need your help with something. How do I put this in a way that is not too specific, but specific enough? This is really about family of origin stuff and not letting resentments build. Growing up, I had a lot of trauma. And in therapy, I'm working through PTSD. I'm realizing that I had a lot of PTSD from the family of origin. And it seems like this continues and sometimes continues beyond the grave for some of these people. So I had to have this conversation with somebody who I don't have a relationship with. There was some estate planning stuff that needs to happen. So I needed to have this conversation with this person, or they called me. I didn't really need to have this conversation. This person wanted to talk to me. And in the middle of this conversation, they said to me, you know, I never blamed you for the relationship, right? I never held anything against you. That's what they said. I never held anything against you. And I'm thinking, that's good because I didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
Nothing like blaming the victim. So if I hear that, I'm also hearing, I do blame you, or I do hold it against you, that the relationship went sour. And I'm having this conversation, and it was peak emotional intelligence. The fact that I did not lose my ever-living shit. And there were other things that happened in the conversation, too, that were just absolutely maddening. So from that, I'm thinking around, this is a topic about how do you deal with the family of origin, but also even when somebody has done something, you've done nothing wrong, somebody says or does something to you, how do you not let that turn into a resentment? How do you not blow through the stuff that you need the steps for? If that makes sense.
Oh, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's great to be with you this morning. Happy Father's Day to you. For those who are recording this, everybody. Yeah, recording this Sunday morning on Father's Day. You know, that's good stuff. First of all, family of origin can be difficult for many of us, right? I mean, depending on what that is. I know it wasn't difficult. I mean, I had a good family of origin. I mean, we had our issues, but it was pretty good. But when we get into this program and we start to do this work, we talk about all the time that this program is a life-living program, right? I mean, we go in there to get sober. I've talked about it before. That was my problem. When I went in the first time in 95, I'm like, oh, I'm here to stop drinking. And when I did, I thought I was fine. I wasn't fine. But it's a way to live our life. And one of the things in our literature tells us that it addresses this specific issue. It says that when we're doing some of the stuff, I don't remember where it is in there. It must be, or maybe around step 9. We have to remember that other people are sick too, right? And so people.
Let me pause you for a second. Yeah. I needed to hear that.
Yeah.
Because this is a very sick person in many ways.
Right. So and here's the thing. We talk about it all the time. I talk about how blessed I am to have this program. Right? And this is the whole thing, is like, am I happy that I was an alcoholic and I did a lot of damage before I was able to find these rooms and find the right way to work this program and live my life? No, of course I'm not happy that I hurt a lot of people along that way. But now I have options and tools that a lot of people don't have. And I have to remind myself that too, right? That people are hurting. They're sick. They don't know, right? Listen, I blame plenty of people. I just got off the phone talking with my stepson who lives in New Jersey about a relative, and how this person is in their 70s. They've made some life choices, and they're at a place where they can't do anything more than rent a room, right? And they love to blame other people, just like you were talking about. And when you talk to them, they'll start doing some conspiracy theory stuff. Oh, I made investments, and I got screwed by these people or by the government, all that kind of stuff, right? And I look at this person, and I'm sad for this person, right? I'm sad for this person. I'm sad that this person's life. It's easy to do when you're not connected, if it's not somebody close and you have to deal with them. But I always remember today that people are sick. They don't have my program. I try to, we talk about living with, maybe last week before, we talked about living with empathy and compassion. That's sort of what we have to bring to these type of things, right? Empathy, compassion, and go, man, this person is really struggling, right? Like, yeah, I mean, if you didn't do anything wrong, then you got nothing to be worried about. And it's just like it's more about us in these situations when we make these accusations and have these resentments. It's more about them and what's happening in their life.
Right. I prayed before this conversation, and I don't usually do that. But in this case, I did, because I remembered program. Program says if you're going to do something difficult, something you feel like you can't do, ask your higher power to step in and be there for you. And this is out of character for me, but I did it because I felt like I need every tool in my arsenal. I'm going to do this. And I will tell you, having that conversation, I did feel protected.
Good.
I could feel the things that would trigger me, but they didn't trigger me. It was sort of like the impact was a 10 on this conversation, but my ability to get through it. How do I say this? It's like the needle is pinned at the end of the impact of what could happen, but how I felt wasn't that bad.
You know what I think part of that is I've certainly talked about my feelings about prayer and all that higher power stuff. So I think about part of that, what that is for me. And you hear a lot of people, like, before I do an amends, I pray before I go there, and I bring my higher power with me, right? You hear that type of statement all the time, and I think that's what you're referring to, like you brought it in. For me, what that does is it sort of sets my mind in the proper place, right? Like, okay, I start sort of rehearsing, like anything else in life, right? If you're going to go to a meeting, if you were going to go to a meeting and you had to present or listen to something, you would get somewhat prepared for it. Like, you would think about it. You would think about what the subject might be. So that's what you're doing when you take that time to pray. If you're not a praying person, then it's just have some positive thoughts. It's sort of work through that scenario about what could happen. And it's like doing an amends, right? You sort of get prepared. How can this go sideways? So again, that's one of the steps we learned. So that's what happens to me if just like you said, if I take the time and reset myself before that situation. Because what happens is when I do not react well, right? And I do go bullshit. And it's inappropriate. Like, we talk about emotional sobriety. Like, if I'm not paying attention to that, depending on where I'm at, it could get ugly. Even today with a decent amount of sobriety, it can get ugly if I don't pay attention to where I'm at.
I'm working through in therapy PTSD stuff. So my other concern was I don't want to cause more damage. I don't want to cause more therapy to happen because of this conversation. And I was very fortunate to get through it businesslike, because that was my philosophy was, I'm going to treat this like a business conversation. I'm going to be polite. I'm going to be nice, but I'm also going to be businesslike. I'm going to say as little as I need to get the information I want, because this person wanted to meet face to face to have this conversation, and that wasn't going to happen.
Right.
And I was able to guide it with just like, well, tell me what you would need to discuss face to face. What would be the purpose of a face to face conversation? Again,
and one of those lessons, right? That you sort of thought about this whole situation and you put some boundaries around it, right? Mm-hmm. Again, you protected yourself. We talk about that all the time. You put some boundaries around it and you're like, here's what I'm willing to do, right? Because this is the whole thing. We've talked about when we come into this program and when we decide to change our life, basically, right? Mm-hmm. You hear the other thing you hear in the program, and again, it's not for everybody, but for a lot of us, hey, the only thing I was told the only thing I had to change was everything. Yes. Okay. And that includes your relationship, possibly, depending on what your background is, possibly with your family of origin, right? I talked about it before. Like, I have a brother who I love dearly, but when I first got sober, especially way back in 95, he was still a really, really heavy partier, and I had to really, really limit my interactions with him, right? I just had to protect myself from him. So regardless if it's family of origin or not, changes may have to be made there. And I always have to remember that. Today I'm older, I'm wiser, I know how to handle that. My family of origin has shrunk vastly. We were one of 8, right? We were a family of 8, 2 parents, 6 kids, and we're down to 3, right? Down to 3. Mm-hmm. So, there's only a couple of people to deal with. I don't talk to my 2 siblings on a regular basis. I don't know, a few times, certainly several times a year, depending on the situation. We're going to a wedding, I'll see them there. But I also don't need to have that. I don't need to have that contact. And I've ran into some of those issues, right? When I've had brothers and sisters die and parents die. And one of the things, just to give you a little background on that too, like, my father died after my mother, so the estate got divvied up there, and there wasn't a lot of money. When I'm talking about estate, I'm not talking about a lot of money, but there was a little bit of money. And one of the things he had was, a lot of them, they had these. My mom had it too, and my dad had a couple life insurance policies that were sort of floating out there, not big, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. Probably got it from work. It was just sitting out there. When he died, it came to the thing. And my sister, we split up the estate. I handled it all. And we split up the estate. Everybody got paid off. And then we found this life insurance policy. And it had my sister as the beneficiary. All right. Now, if that was me, I would have taken that money and I would have split it with my siblings, right? And again, it wasn't much money.
Yep.
But once my sister found out that it was in her name, we never heard another word about it, right? She took it. She used it. And again, I know my brother was pissed off about that. I'm like, she needed it. She did need it, honestly. And it's like, I didn't have a problem with it. But those are the type of challenges that happen as you get older, especially. And I start dealing with these things, these estates, parents dying, in-laws dying. Like, those can be very difficult, triggering things to deal with.
So I'm in a little bit of that situation where there is, I could make a case for fighting over something like that, but I look at everything all in all, and I just don't feel like it's worth the fight. Right. What am I going to get out of some type of legal battle? And I'm going to piss off some other people for not much back.
Right.
It doesn't feel like the right thing to do.
And again, that's another wisdom thing of saying, something, you pick your fights. We always talk about it, pick your fights. And this, maybe it's one not to pick. One of the things I'll say, and this is why I love being in a relationship, being married for me, with someone who's really, really different and has a really different upbringing and background than me. When my mother-in-law died, okay, and that estate, my wife was the one settled that estate. Every single thing that came to light, she only has one sibling, one sister, everything got split. And if my wife stumbled upon something like, there's one thing, like, my mother-in-law, which we still have downstairs, had a bunch of silverware, silver setting and stuff. And it's like, and we were like, oh, we should bring it, we should sell it. Finally, my wife one day said, here, I'm gonna give you this much money for that, right? Like, she always did the right thing with that. Like, there was never anything. And I just look at, like, just the integrity of that. Like, there's never a thought of doing anything different. And it was nice to watch that, you know? And she has a good relationship with her sister. But it's not, you know, her whole family wasn't as close and loving as my family was, right? They sort of like, of course they cared for each other and all, but it was very different. And I just remember watching all that going, and trust me, my wife could have said, like, we did all the work, right? Like, we did all the work of that estate, which is getting the house ready for sale. We did a lot of work, and I did a lot of work. And just as a sidebar, the one time since I've been back that I really thought I might drink was during that period where we were trying to settle this estate, trying to get our house ready. And I know I told the story, but it was a situation where, man, I was very close. Let me see. I was, I don't know, about 5 years sober or something. And I was very close to drinking. And I didn't, thank God, because I have some tools. But but it's stressful. That's my point. It can be stressful. It can be challenging, right? When we get involved, especially, I didn't have any control over it, right? It wasn't my gig. All right, it was like with my parents, when I was doing my dad, I was in complete control of it. Here, I'm on the sideline. And I'm watching some stuff, and I don't have control, which for me is a difficult thing.
Right.
So you got to be careful. I mean, I know I have to be careful with that stuff. And like you said, we rely on our program. We rely on the tools we have in order to figure out some of this stuff.
Well, then I'm going to have to leverage your talents with some of that stuff so that it's not those things that overwhelm me. I don't know how I got through all these awful people in my family. I really don't. I think I've told some of these stories before that I had relatives who would on purpose accidentally burn me with cigarettes when I was a kid. I must have been 6 or 7 years old, not much older. And my aunt had this large kerosene heater in the middle of her living room. Yep. And I fell back on it and burned my hands. And my mother told me, because I was screaming and crying, she said, you know, your grandmother broke her hip and she doesn't cry, so you shouldn't either. Yeah. Things like that. One of my mother's favorite devices for discipline was she would yell, you know, if you don't start behaving, I'm going to take your temperature with the rectal thermometer. Not good stuff.
Right. Yeah, very. You know, today it's different, right? It certainly is different, right? Where you grew up, you're a Generation Xer. We grew up in different times. Today, obviously, that is all recognized, and it probably was back then less so. Today, you know, all of that's recognized as emotional abuse, right?
Yeah,
definitely emotional abuse for sure. There's no question about it, right? I mean, all of the resources we now have in school and stuff like that. And, you know, we live with that stuff, some of us, all the time. I mean, listen, I have my own trauma, right? I have my own trauma growing up. It wasn't abuse like that. Or let me put it this way. It wasn't abuse like that I remember, right? There's always I've done some therapy too, and there's always been some question in my mind whether it was anything like it, not even from family members, but just in general, because I witnessed a bunch of abusive stuff, but never towards me. And again, not a family of origin stuff outside the family. It's usually friends and neighbors and stuff like that. But you know, it's really, it's something. Listen, we're survivors for many of us, right? I mean, it really is interesting the kind of stuff that people can survive and get through in the other end. And that's the other thing that I'm able to do now. My Friday night meeting, we were talking about, one of the things we were talking about Cadillac problems. It sort of came up, right? And so today I'm able to look at my problems and understand what they are in respect to other people in the world. And it's funny because I had to help out one of our cohorts, Paulie D, and I went to help him out. He needed something printed off. He was in a car accident, needed some forms printed off, and he couldn't do it. I'm like, I don't live far from him. I'm like, hey, just shoot me. He didn't even know how to send me the form. I'm like, here, do this. Send me a text. Attach it to the text message. I'll print it off. I'll bring it up to you. And I knew he was going to need a ride. His car's, so we dropped it off. So, but when I got here, the point of the story is when I got here, he goes, how you doing? And this is exactly what I said to him. Paulie, I got a shitload of Cadillac problems sitting back at home. And I said, and yeah, they're Cadillac problems, but they're still my problems, right? Mm-hmm. I recognize what they are. Like, I had a problem with my in-ground heated pool, right? It's a fucking Cadillac problem, right? But it's also a big problem because I was afraid that it was going to cost me, a bunch of money to get it fixed. So I get it today. I'm able to put it in perspective. So when I look at my stuff, I look at, it sucks. Sucks to be me today. But the truth is, I'm not, I'm not as bad off as sometimes I want to believe I am.
It's a case of perspective.
Absolutely.
Problems are problems, and if they're gnawing on you, it doesn't matter. You can't compare other people's problems to yourself. But it is also good to have the perspective of, this feels like a problem for me, but in the grand scheme of things, what's the manageability of this?
Right.
And you could go down the sympathetic route, which is, well, at least you have blah, blah, blah. You go down the empathetic route of, wow, it sounds like that's really causing issues for you. And I think the program has helped me become more empathetic of others. I wasn't feeling empathy because all my brain power yesterday was on, I have to get from point A to point B. Beginning of the conversation, end of the conversation. And I was frightened to have this conversation. But what can help me, and this is, I think, the thing that'll help me with not being resentful, of the other person has their own issues. Right. And they're not addressing them in the way I'm addressing them. And if you're not working on those problems, they're going to still come out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, listen, again, my wife hates when I talk about her in this type of, in the AA world. But I need to use her because it's a perspective that I think could help people. And, I look at that all the time, right? My wife has her own issues, right? She has health issues and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. That, again, I'm a control type of person that I'd like to see her address, right? And if they don't get addressed, then I get frustrated over it. But I always have to remember, and I do now, I'm much better at it. Like, she's her own person. She's an adult. She gets to make all these choices, whether I like them or not. Now, it's a little bit different in this situation, and maybe in your situation too. I don't know exactly what the situation is you're talking about, but her decisions do impact me, right? Because, if she doesn't take care of her health, then it puts a burden on me to maybe have to care for her more than I want to, or whatever. Not that I want to, but that I wish I had to. And it's those type of things that I have to work on this all the time. And again, these are the things where I easily go sideways on that. Just the other day, like the last few days, I've been working really, really hard outside. I mean, physically hard. We're moving stone from the back. Anyway, but I was really hard. And I came in like the second day of doing that type of work. And she said something to me, and I just couldn't talk to her. Like I literally could not talk to her. So I don't know how I answered her. And one thing she said to me, she was in her bedroom just reading, and she was like, "Are you okay?" And like, I don't even think I answered that question, right? Because at that time I was physically exhausted. I was sort of, I was hot. So today I'm able to sort of do that and like, I better not talk right now. But it's about managing it all, right? For me, it's about managing me, right? It's about what's the impact on me that I need to sort of deal with. And I listen, I think you did a great job. You don't need to be that perfect person with empathy and compassion every time you go. Like sometimes when you go to a situation, it's about survival and protection, right? That's what it is.
That's how it felt.
Right. Survival and protection. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with you protecting yourself so that you're available to your family, right? Because what happens if you walk out of there and you're a mess? People around you are going to pay for it.
Yep.
Right? They're going to pay for it. So it's really, and listen, and that's not only that the challenge, but there is a responsibility for us, right? And this is the other thing. There's a responsibility for us to recognize that and recognize the fact that we need to take care of ourselves so that we don't end up taking this stuff out on other people. And again, these are lifelong lessons for me. These are lifelong challenges for me. That I've gotten better at them. With them, I've gotten better with them over the years, but far from perfect. And again, it's why I still go to meetings. It's why I still do my program, right? It's why I still go and listen to other alcoholics. I go to listen to other alcoholics. I realize my problems aren't that bad, and I go there for advice. And I go like, oh yeah, that happened to me too. And I hear how this person handled it. And I'm like, maybe I'll try that. Like there's lots of reasons why I go to meetings, even when I don't want to go to meetings, right? Because it just helps me out in all aspects of my life.
Yeah, I hear you. I think about what I have learned in program and from other people. I didn't think about if this went wrong, the impact to my family of me lashing out. But I also do think, I was thinking through, I don't want to have to cause any more amends.
Right.
So in that sense, but it was a protected bubble that I was in.
Right.
Just trying to get through.
But our buddy Edson always says one of the reasons why he tries to act properly is because he hates making amends, right? And I get that, right? So this is the whole point. If you really hate making amends, nobody likes to make real amends. Then it forces you to think about your behavior. Again,
it sure does.
You're not going to be bored, but it forces you to think about it. Like, how should I handle this situation? One of the things I started doing this little volunteer thing. I do it for 6 hours a week, 3 hours on Monday, 3 hours on Thursday. And there's a woman there who she's just one of these kind, compassionate, people. And now that I've been able to sit around and watch her, how she handles things, I'm just so impressed by her. And that's what I love about life now. It's like I can look at this woman and go, man, I really could use some of those qualities, right? Like she is so, I watch her deal with some of the people we deal with. She is so good. She's been a volunteer for a long time. And I'm just in awe of that. And that's what I'm able to do today is I'm able to look at other people, and think, man, I wish I could be better at that skill. And then try to work at it. One of the things I've always done, just as a side note, when I would go to wakes of people, and especially at a time when I was still doing a lot of praying and stuff, and I would say a prayer either at the casket or the urn of someone, one of the prayers I would say is I would ask God, at the time I was praying to God, to give me one of their best qualities. Like, take one of the best qualities of these people and bestow it upon me. Because I could use that help, right? Mm-hmm. And I could use, I could do a lot of things better in my life. But listen, it's again, we talk about it. We both live pretty good lives. We're fortunate to live where we live, at the time we live, in all of those things. And I try to be grateful for that.
I'm lucky for a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
I am lucky to have found a program that has walked me through and gives me the roadmap of how to get through really bad problems. And I have gotten through some nasty stuff in life, like deaths, and I didn't have to drink over it. And every day is not great, but I have the tools to get through the tough spots. I'd love to hear what you have to say. You can reach out, soberfriendspod.com, and click on the little email thing and email me, Matt@soberfriendspod, or you can reach out on Instagram @soberfriendspod. What resonated today, and how do you get through the issues with your family of origin, or those known difficult conversations that you have to have and you got to get through it? And because you want to stay sober, how do you do it without building resentments? Steve, thank you for your help today. I very much appreciate it. This is stuff I needed to talk through.
Good enough, Matt.
And we'll see everybody next week. Bye, everybody.
You made it this far into the podcast. That tells me you're a pretty big fan. If you like what we do and you find value in the podcast, consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod. Your donation keeps us on the air to help out the new guy and helps us defray some of our costs. If you find value in our podcast, please consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod.